Well, extremist groups, including QAnon followers, ISIS, and white supremacists, certainly have expanded their ranks by recruiting individuals on major social media platforms. The Christchurch shooter who killed 51 people and inspired the Poway and El Paso shooters was radicalized on YouTube and live-streamed his attacks on Facebook to rally others to his cause. 3 years later, a shooter in Buffalo, New York, streamed his attack on Twitch, which acted quickly to take it down, but the video was soon circulating widely on Facebook. Mr. Redder, you could tell this committee, why do these platforms' recommendation algorithms spread this extremist content just so rapidly?
Thank you for the question. So the way to understand these recommendations, they don't have intentionality about specific types of content. But the way they work is they assemble a massive amount of information. They model everything about you, your usage, your interests, your geography, who you're connected to, what you've engaged with historically, and then they model the content and they try to match those optimally. And what makes this so dangerous is there's a positive feedback loop. And if you pick something not controversial, just pick a hobby, knitting, for example. If I think that you're somewhat into knitting, I might recommend some knitting content to you because I believe you'll engage with it. You do engage with it, that both makes you more interested in knitting because you're doing the hobby more, but also it feeds back to the algorithm, which then has signal that you do like more of this content. So the next day or the next session, it's more confident that you will engage in this content and you'll go further down the rabbit hole. Obviously with knitting, that's fine, but this is true for all sorts of content. Because of this feedback loop, if you have some proclivity or some interest in some topic, you will be fed more of that. That generally feeds your interest, and you're fed more and more. And that's why we see people that start off with more things in common than differences, sort of splitting and fracturing as they each go into their worlds that are more and more different and have less in common with other people. This is all an inevitable consequence of this optimization of driving engagement.
Well, Sir, in terms of content that can take you down the extremist, are companies able to change some of those algorithms to prevent that from occurring, at least with that kind of content, and how would that work?
You certainly could, in theory. It will never happen given the current incentive structure. So these are for-profit companies. They are incented to maximize profit, and before they have realizable profits, they are incented to show massive user growth to convince investors that they will be massively profitable in the future. The way they do that is getting people to come back to their platform over and over. The way they do that is for optimizing engagement. So as long as the algorithms are optimizing for showing you things that you will engage with, we will always have this positive feedback loop property. I show you something you're interested in, you get more interested in it, you're more likely to keep engaging. So you can build an AI to train for anything, but you pick an incentive based on the overarching incentive of the environment you find yourself in this case, a public company that's reporting to shareholders. So until those incentives change, we should not expect the AI to optimize for anything other than engagement and profit maximization.
Mr. Redder, we're going to hear later this afternoon from chief product officers at some of these major companies. Is it possible for them to set different priorities for product development to address the spread of extremist content? Is that within their purview, and is that something they should be able to talk about?
In practice, it's not possible. And the reason is, these are just individuals. This isn't a matter of a few bad eggs running companies. This is a system that these people find themselves in. They're in a system where they have to report user growth, engagement, attention, increasing attention from the users, and profit. And I should add, this attention game is a race to the bottom. If I build a product that is less addictive than a competitor's product, by definition, user eyeballs and attention will go over to the competitor. So then I have to, in turn, make my product more addictive to pull people back, or I'll quickly be abandoned by investors. So given that structure, there is no way that a product leader or any other executive at a company could optimize for anything other than those core metrics, engagement and revenue, because that's the system they find themselves in.
So they can't do it by themselves. It has to be broader than that. But they're at the front end of that, or at the beginning of that, to understand exactly how that incentive structure, how those priorities shape the work that they do. They can talk about that, I suspect.
They could talk about that. They are doing exactly what you would expect them to do, given the environment they find themselves in. So as long as the incentives of those companies are what they will continue to behave the way they are behaving. And if they didn't, it would hurt the trajectory of the company.
Very good. Mr. Boland, why are the actions taken by trust and security teams at these platforms just not enough to deal with this problem? We're going to hear a lot about these teams, I think, this afternoon. Why is that not enough?
Yeah, I imagine that you'll hear that there are significant investments from the companies in trust and safety, and it is true they make some investments. The important thing to think about with trust and safety effort is that if it is siloed from the rest of the process, if it is a last check safeguard or a group that is small and not a core part of the way that people build products, it will always be an afterthought. And it will always be a team that has to fight in the battle of trade-offs between their ways that they would like to improve trust and safety and impacts to growth. And impacts to growth translate to impacts to revenue. That dual tension of not receiving enough resources and being at odds with the product development teams and the product development process makes it so that team has to fight for any sort of interventions they want to put in place. You can change the way that product teams could work with those organizations. A good example would be the efforts that Facebook is now putting in place around privacy. So for a number of years, we know that Facebook and Meta had not been at the top of its game on privacy. After the last set of issues with the FTC, the company has invested significantly in efforts around privacy and has made that something that the product teams and product managers actually have to care about. So as long as that team in trust and safety is off to the side, if there aren't the incentives in place that say to the company, you really have to make sure that when people are making day-to-day decisions, they are prioritizing these efforts, that team is fighting a losing battle, both in resources, because they're battling against a number of people, and incentives at the company, because they have to justify every single change that they want to make. It's not a core part of how the teams think.
And so at best, they're going to be follow-up. The products are going to get launched. They're going to potentially cause problems that team may have even recognized, but they weren't able to interject that effectively during the product development phase. And then later they may be engaged, but at that point, the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak, before that they can get engaged. Is that correct?
That's correct. My experience was that, and you can kind of understand this if you think about where these companies started and the incredibly short period of time that they've grown to be as successful as they are. These are, they still feel like startups in the way that the leaders think, even though these are some of the biggest companies in the world. At the beginning of their life cycle, it was about trying to figure out products that could grow and grow effectively in the world, and has gone to a point where they haven't matured out of that stage. So, you know, I think that we can get to a point where these companies could do more in that space. We just haven't seen them make that transition into more responsible set of activities.
Right. Thank you. During your opening statements, I think each of you discussed the product development process at these companies, and we've talked at length about that process through the hearing. Mr. Boland, though, you discussed how Facebook does not incentivize limiting the spread of harmful content, but of course prioritizes growth and revenue. So could you tell the committee generally what metrics inform employee compensation at the company? What goes into that?
Employees at Facebook, you kind of receive it's about rewards, right? And so the rewards that you receive is your cash compensation, your stock compensation, then promotions. And generally, if you're building products, you're rewarded on the success of that product. And that product success is defined by some set of metrics around whether that product is being used more. So let's pretend that you're building a video product. The things that you'll care about are the metrics around what are the total watch hours, so how many hours are being spent watching videos, how many, what's the user growth, how many people are using that video product, where does that spread geographically, et cetera. You're incentivized on those hard metrics, and then you're not incentivized around, well, what kind of content are you growing your video with? What's the stuff underneath the hood that's showing up, that's driving this growth? That's not your problem. That's somebody else's problem. Now, there may be company-wide goals where they say, okay, for the company, we're gonna, I wasn't aware of any sort of safety or trust goals, but they could theoretically create one. The problem is that doesn't drive individual behavior. Company goals are kind of there. You don't think about them. You think about what you individually and your team are goaled to deliver. That is always metrics. That's always product growth metrics and success metrics of the product, and not success in are we keeping people safe.
There's not a trust and safety metric.
For the trust and safety team, actually, my understanding is they've been disbanded and moved into a central team. I did not experience products like video or others carrying a metric that was incentivizing trust or safety.
That's not there. Mr. Redder, was that the case as well?
Yes, I agree with all of that. There's that promotion system, compensation system, review system. The problem with trust and safety metrics, typically companies they'll have 5 top-level goals, let's say, and maybe one of them is trust and safety. The problem is that is at odds with the other metrics, and the other metrics always win. And if I am an engineer building, say, a new live streaming video service, if I launch that product and it gets some usage, that is a feather in my cap. That's something I can say that I did. I can point to its effect. That will help me with promotions, compensation, career advancement. If at the last minute I decide not to launch that product because I realize I can't control some of the safety aspects and we shouldn't do it if we can't do it without certain safeguards, I get 0 credit for that. It's as if I've done nothing for the company over the last X months. So in that incentive structure,
you're in effect, you'll be punished, and your future advancement will probably be questionable as well.
it's no different as a product that I build and then I don't launch because it might not be safe is no different than if I just didn't show up to work.
Right.
In terms of the future credit that I get.
Not a good place for an employee to be.
Correct.
Not a good place, and you can change incentives, and you can change the way that people show up, not even just through goals, but through process. So there was an example where when Facebook started as a desktop site and moved to mobile, Mark Zuckerberg required that all products that were demoed to him showed mobile in their demonstration, that they had designs around that. He kicked the first team out that came in without that design, and suddenly everybody was thinking about mobile designs. If in your process you created an incentive where you said, let's as part of every product design discussion is what are all the harmful ways this product can drive hate or drive extremism or drive polarization, you would have a radical change in the way that people showed up to those meetings and in the process thought about the negative impacts of their product.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Mr. Boland, before you left, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you voiced objections about how Facebook recommendation algorithms were actually promoting extreme, hateful, and racist content. Is that correct?
That's correct. My concerns were specifically around racist content.
So what was the reaction from your senior leadership within Facebook when you expressed these concerns?
It was disappointing. So I raised the issues, particularly around the distribution of racist content that I was seeing in the CrowdTangle tool, and my concerns that we didn't understand it, and brought forward 3 steps that I felt would be very good internal steps to actually help mitigate the problem. 1, more internal researchers, 2, more data to external researchers, and 3, beefing up CrowdTangle to share more information. I had a range of responses from "you're wrong," and that's not the case. That this is driving us with no evidence, mind you. Just I believe you're wrong, and no counter evidence. To some, this might be a problem, but not something that we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm. But when you say no evidence on those statements that you're wrong, you work for a company that looks at a lot of data and makes decisions based on data, but this is something they wanted to ignore, basically.
Yeah, so a particularly concerning moment for me was when I had my moment where I really came to terms with believing that the product could be causing harm. I started to look at a variety of things that research teams were doing internally to understand what they were seeing. And the internal dialogue and the internal documents, many of which Frances Haugen has shared, were troubling. There was a particular document that was an overview of polarization research from, I think, June of 2020. And that talked about political polarization. And one of the lines said, we have not researched and have very little understanding of racial, ethnic, or religious polarization. That underinvestment was significantly concerning to me.
Yeah. Mr. Redder, one of the documents submitted by a Twitter whistleblower to the SEC last month was a 2021 study that he commissioned of the site integrity team's capabilities. The study found that Twitter planned to launch a new product, Fleets, just weeks before the 2020 elections. The integrity team, according to that document, I'm quoting the document, said, quote, had to beg the product team not to launch before the election because they did not have the resources or capabilities to take action on misinformation or disinformation on the new product, unquote. The report also found, quote, while product teams do elicit feedback for new product launches, product managers are incentivized to ship products as quickly as possible and thus are willing to accept security risk, end of quote. Are these findings consistent with the pattern of decision-making that you saw?
So with the caveat that that specific example happened after I was there and I can't speak to it, that's absolutely consistent. In fact, I would be surprised, given the incentives at play, if the product team had done anything else. One way we used to talk about product managers is they're, quote unquote, the mini CEOs of their product, and they get consultation from other teams, trust and safety, legal, finance, compliance, but it's their decision to launch or not. And again, there is no possible credit or reward from not launching, whereas there's possibly a credit or reward from launching. And because that they probably had more confidence that it would at least get some usage and potentially drive revenue, there's every reason to launch and not worry about the other issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just follow up on just brief question on transparency. It's pretty clear. We need transparency. We need to have, though, the active involvement of researchers that use that data and researchers, whether they're academics or civil rights groups or rights organizations, journalists, everybody has to be engaged. One pushback we could get, I like your response, is that, do you think there's a ways that we can protect user data and still provide the kind of data that's necessary for these researchers? Is that possible? Mr. Rutter and Mr. Boland?
Yes, this is certainly, you will get that pushback as well as a bunch of other pushback, I'm sure. So one, it's possible we can obfuscate the data, we can generate random ideas, you can hide the personally identifiable information. Secondly, there are examples when third-party reviewers have access to confidential information, and because they operate in a professional manner and are well-trusted, that doesn't mean it leaks out publicly. So, one of the examples I gave was auditors in the course of certifying financial statements see a bunch of internal financial performance that, if it leaked out, would be extremely valuable to competitors. And the reason we have third-party auditors is they're allowed to balance the public's need for information with the company's need to keep information private. So we could do the exact same thing. There are secure computing environments. For example, there's a bunch of healthcare data in the world which has a bunch of personally identifiable information and very strict legislated privacy requirements around that. And that's managed in a way such that people can extract insights from the data without violating individual privacy. We could do the same thing here.
Right. Mr. Boland?
It is absolutely possible and doable. There are some hard aspects to it, but it can be done. I think there's two components that I think are favorable there. One, with the increased TikTokization of services, more and more content is public content. So you're really not dealing with issues around privacy and private data. For private data, Meta was able to solve it with their ads measurement system. So we built a system where we could connect the ads that people saw on Facebook with the purchases that they bought in a physical store. And we were able to do that in a privacy-safe way. If we can do it for ads, you can do it for these other areas as well.
Right. Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank the three of you for your testimony here today. You certainly provided some very insightful contributions to what is a very important conversation. We appreciate your availability to be part of the first panel for this hearing.